The crack of a gunshot echoed through the night as Eleanor Davis fled her burning homestead, the hem of her mourning dress catching on brambles as she ran blindly into the darkness. It was May 1879, and in the span of one terrible night, she had lost everything her husband to consumption just 2 weeks prior, and now her home to the greed of men who wouldn't wait for her grief to subside before making their move. Eleanor had known something was wrong when 3 riders approached her small farm on the outskirts of Green River, Wyoming that afternoon. Their leader, a man with a scar bisecting his left cheek, had presented papers claiming her husband had borrowed money he could never have afforded. The debt, they insisted, was now due with her homestead as payment. "My husband never borrowed from you," she had protested, clutching the doorframe of the house she and Thomas had built together over 5 years of marriage. "These papers are forgeries." The man had smiled coldly. "Judge Baldwin doesn't think so, madam. You've got till sundown to clear out." She'd slammed the door in their faces, her heart pounding. Thomas had left her with little, but their home was rightfully hers. She'd planned to ride into town at first light to speak with the sheriff, but they hadn't given her that chance. They returned after dark, torches in hand. Now Eleanor ran, the orange glow of her burning life illuminating the Wyoming landscape behind her. 30 years old and suddenly homeless, she had nothing but the clothes on her back and her husband's pocket watch clutched in her palm. The May night was cold, and her thin black dress offered little protection against the biting wind that swept down from the mountains. After what felt like hours, Eleanor collapsed beside a stream, her legs giving out beneath her. Cupping water to her parched lips, she tried to calm the frantic beating of her heart. The men wouldn't follow her, not tonight. They had what they wanted, but where could she go? Green River was 10 miles away, and she had no horse, no supplies. A rustling sound made her freeze. Eleanor held her breath, peering into the darkness, when the silhouette of a rider appeared against the night sky. Had they followed her after all? She scrambled backward, but her foot slipped on the muddy bank, sending her tumbling into the shallow stream with a splash that surely gave away her position. "Hello," a deep voice called out, not the scarred man who'd burned her home. This voice was different, cautious, not threatening. "Someone there?" Eleanor remained silent, shivering in the cold water. The rider dismounted, leading his horse toward the sound. "I don't mean no harm. Saw the fire from my property. Thought I should check." A lantern flared to life, and in its glow, Eleanor saw a tall man in a worn leather vest and dusty hat. His face was partially obscured by several days' worth of beard, but his eyes, when they found her huddled in the stream, showed concern rather than malice. "Madam." He stepped closer, holding the lantern higher. "You're soaked through. Are you hurt?" Eleanor tried to speak, but her teeth chattered too violently to form words. "That was your place burning?" he asked, his voice softening. When she managed a nod, he set the lantern down and shrugged off his coat. "Here, you'll catch your death." The warmth of the coat enveloped her as he draped it over her shoulders. It smelled of horses and leather and wood smoke, not unpleasant. "Name's Vincent Xavier," he said, offering his hand to help her up. "Most folks call me Vince. My ranch is about 3 miles north of here." Eleanor took his hand, her fingers numb with cold. "Eleanor Davis," she managed. "They burned my home, said my husband owed them money, but it's not true. They forged papers." Vincent's expression hardened. "Would one of these men have a scar on his face? Rides with 2 others, one tall and skinny, one built like a bull." "Yes," Eleanor whispered, hope flickering. "Do you know them? Silas Mercer and his boys." Vincent spat the name like it tasted foul. "They've been running land schemes all through the territory. Sheriff can't never pin anything on them." Eleanor's legs threatened to give out again, but Vincent's steadying hand kept her upright. "You got family in town?" he asked. She shook her head. "No one. Thomas and I came west from Philadelphia 6 years ago. He died 2 weeks past. Consumption." Something like recognition flashed in Vincent's eyes. "Davis, your husband raised horses, didn't he? Sold me a fine stallion last year." "Yes," Eleanor said, surprised. "That was Thomas." Vincent nodded, seemingly making up his mind about something. "Mrs. Davis, I've got a proposition. I need someone to cook and keep house at my ranch. Lost my housekeeper to marriage last month. Been eating my own cooking since, and I'm liable to poison myself before summer's end." He gestured to his horse. "It's honest work with a roof and meals, at least until you decide what's next." Eleanor hesitated. Going with a stranger was risky, but her alternatives were few. She could try to make it to town, but with no money and no connections, what then? "I can cook," she said finally, and I kept the books for Thomas's business." Vincent nodded, seeming pleased. "Good, that's settled then." He helped her onto his horse before mounting behind her, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "It's not much, my place, but it's dry and warm." As they rode through the darkness, Eleanor felt tears finally come for Thomas, for her home, for the uncertain future ahead. Vincent said nothing, giving her the dignity of private grief, but his presence was oddly reassuring. She didn't know this man, this Vincent Xavier, but somehow she knew he wouldn't hurt her. The ranch came into view as they crested a small hill, a sturdy two-story house with a large barn beside it. It wasn't grand, but it was well kept, with smoke curling from the chimney and a corral of fine horses visible in the moonlight. "Hired hand must have kept the fire going," Vincent explained as he helped Eleanor down. "Frank lives in the bunkhouse out back. Good man, bit simple but loyal." The house was warm inside, with simple furnishings that spoke of a bachelor's practicality rather than any woman's touch. Vincent showed Eleanor to a small bedroom off the kitchen. "It was the housekeeper's room," he explained, lighting a lamp. "There's some of her things still in the drawers. Help yourself until we can get you proper clothes." Eleanor nodded, suddenly exhausted beyond words. "I'll leave you to rest," Vincent said, backing toward the door. "We can talk more in the morning." Left alone, Eleanor sank onto the narrow bed. The events of the night crashed over her in waves, Thomas's grave still fresh on the hillside, the home they'd built together now ashes, and her own uncertain status as a woman alone. And now this cowboy, this stranger with kind eyes, offering shelter when she needed it most. As she drifted into troubled sleep, Eleanor wondered what Thomas would think of her situation. He had always told her she was stronger than she knew. Now she would have to prove him right. Morning brought clarity and the full weight of her losses. Eleanor woke disoriented, momentarily forgetting the previous night's horrors until reality crashed back. The small room was plain but clean, a far cry from the home she'd lovingly decorated over 5 years of marriage, but a sanctuary nonetheless. In the drawer, she found simple dresses left by the previous housekeeper, plain, serviceable clothing that would have to do. Selecting the least worn, Eleanor dressed and attempted to make herself presentable. Her dark hair, usually pinned neatly, had partially come loose in her flight. She secured it as best she could and stepped into the kitchen. Vincent was already there, attempting to coax something edible from a cast iron skillet. He glanced up when she entered, and for the first time in full daylight, Eleanor saw her benefactor clearly. He was younger than she'd thought, perhaps 35, with brown hair streaked by the sun and a face weathered by outdoor life. His eyes were a striking blue, crinkling at the corners as he offered an awkward smile. "Mrs. Davis," he greeted her, tipping his head. "How'd you sleep?" "As well as could be expected," she replied honestly. "Mr. Xavier, I want to thank you for your kindness. Not many would have." "Just Vince, please," he interrupted, turning back to the stove with a frown. "And it's no more than anyone would do." Eleanor knew that wasn't true. A woman alone was vulnerable in the West. Vincent's offer of legitimate employment rather than charity preserved her dignity, but it was kindness nonetheless. "You're burning the bacon," she observed, moving toward the stove. Vincent stepped back with evident relief. "Told you I was liable to poison myself." Eleanor took over the cooking, grateful for the familiar task that allowed her to focus on something other than her circumstances. As she worked, Vincent explained the ranch, 200 acres, mostly dedicated to raising and training horses. Besides himself, there was only Frank, the hired hand who helped with the livestock. "Not as big as some spreads," he admitted, "but it's mine free and clear. No bank can take it." They were interrupted by the arrival of Frank, a hulking man with a boyish face despite being close to 50. His eyes widened at the sight of Eleanor. "Miss Eleanor will be keeping house for us," Vincent explained simply. Her place burned down last night. Sela's Mercer's doing. Frank's expression darkened at the name. Mercer's a snake, he said, his voice surprisingly gentle for such a large man. Tried to buy Mr. Vince's water rights last year, offered money first, then threats. And got neither, Vincent added, pouring coffee. Man doesn't take no for an answer. Will he come here? Eleanor asked, her hands stilling over the skillet, if he learns where I've gone. Vincent and Frank exchanged glances. Let him try, Vincent said quietly. This is my land. The days fell into a pattern as May turned to June. Eleanor threw herself into running Vincent's household, grateful for work that kept her hands busy and her mind occupied. The house, neglected by bachelor care, slowly transformed under her attention. She mended curtains, scrubbed floors, and prepared meals that had Vincent and Frank exchanging looks of astonished pleasure. Vincent, she learned, had come to Wyoming 15 years earlier as little more than a boy. Through hard work and an extraordinary gift with horses, he'd built his modest ranch into something respected in the territory. His horses were sought after for their intelligence and stamina. My father trained cavalry mounts back in Virginia, he explained one evening as they sat on the porch after supper. Taught me everything I know, then the war came and changed everything. Eleanor nodded, understanding the shadows that crossed his face. The war had left scars across the nation, visible and invisible. Vincent didn't elaborate, and she didn't press. Instead, she found herself telling him about Philadelphia, about meeting Thomas at a church social, about their decision to seek opportunity in the West when his health began to fail in the city's smoky air. He loved it here, she said softly, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains. The openness, the possibility. Even when he got sick again, he never regretted coming. Vincent was quiet a moment. He chose well in you, he said finally. Not many Eastern women would have followed their husbands to this wilderness, let alone thrived here. Eleanor felt her cheeks warm at the unexpected compliment. I wasn't sure I would, thrive, I mean, but there's something about this country that gets into your blood. Vincent nodded, a small smile playing at his lips. That it does. 2 weeks after her arrival, Vincent insisted on taking Eleanor into Green River. You need proper clothes, he said, brooking no argument, and we should speak to Sheriff Tillman about what happened. Eleanor hesitated. What if Mercer and his men are there? All the more reason for the sheriff to hear your story, Vincent countered. Besides, you can't hide forever. The ride to town was tense, with Eleanor scanning every rider they passed, but Vincent's solid presence beside her kept panic at bay. Green River was busy when they arrived, the main street crowded with wagons and townspeople going about their business. Sheriff's office first, Vincent decided, helping Eleanor down from the wagon. Then Ward's general store for whatever you need. Sheriff Tillman was a grizzled man with sharp eyes that missed nothing. He listened to Eleanor's account without interruption, then sighed heavily. I've heard similar stories about Mercer, he admitted, but the man's careful. Gets locals to sign as witnesses, has a judge in his pocket over in Sweetwater County. The papers were forged, Eleanor insisted. Thomas never borrowed money. I believe you, Mrs. Davis, Tillman said, but proving it is another matter. Judge Baldwin claims the loan was legitimate. Baldwin, Vincent muttered, he's in on it with Mercer. The sheriff didn't deny it. I'll file your complaint, but don't expect much. Best thing might be to start fresh somewhere else. Eleanor felt defeat settling over her. Even the law offered no recourse. Outside, Vincent placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Don't lose heart. There are other ways to get justice. At the general store, Vincent insisted on purchasing fabric for new dresses, along with practical items Eleanor needed. When she protested the expense, he waved her off. Consider it an advance on your wages, he said. Can't have my housekeeper looking like she borrowed clothes, now can I? As they loaded their purchases, a familiar voice froze Eleanor's blood. Well, look at this. The widow Davis has found herself a protector. Silas Mercer stood in the street, flanked by his 2 associates. His scarred face twisted in a mockery of a smile as his eyes moved from Eleanor to Vincent. Xavier, he acknowledged. Picking up strays now, Vincent's posture shifted subtly, squaring toward Mercer. Mrs. Davis works for me. She has a complaint filed with the sheriff about your business practices. Mercer laughed. Does she now? Shame about that fire. Accidents happen when a woman tries to keep a homestead alone. Eleanor felt her fear transform into anger. It was no accident. You burned my home because I wouldn't give you land that was rightfully mine. Your word against mine, widow. Mercer's eyes hardened. And who do you think folks will believe? A grieving woman making wild accusations or a businessman with proper documentation? Vincent stepped forward, his voice dangerously quiet. I believe her, and I'm not the only one who knows what you are, Mercer. The two men stared at each other, tension crackling between them. Finally, Mercer stepped back with an exaggerated shrug, no need for unpleasantness. Just thought I'd pay my respects to the widow. His eyes slid to Eleanor. Better watch yourself, Mrs. Davis. Your new friend here has enemies of his own. With that cryptic warning, Mercer and his men moved on, disappearing into the saloon across the street. Vincent helped Eleanor into the wagon, his movements controlled but his eyes blazing. I shouldn't have brought you to town, he said as they pulled away. I didn't think he'd be so bold in public. He wants to intimidate me, Eleanor replied, her hands trembling despite her resolve. He believes I'll give up any claim to my land rather than risk more trouble. Vincent glanced at her. Would you? Give it up. Eleanor thought of the small farm where Thomas was buried, now a charred ruin. The land is all I have left of Thomas. But I'm not foolish enough to think I can reclaim it alone. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, both lost in thought. It wasn't until they were nearing Vincent's property that he spoke again. I have something to show you, he said, turning the wagon down a side trail instead of toward the house. They rode for nearly a mile through pine woods before emerging at a small clearing. A cabin stood there, weathered but solid, with a stream running nearby. My first home when I came to Wyoming, Vincent explained as Eleanor took in the scene. Before I built the main house, it needs some work, but it's sound. Eleanor turned to him, confused. Why are you showing me this? Vincent removed his hat, turning it in his hands, a gesture she'd come to recognize as a sign of his discomfort. I thought, that is, if you wanted a place of your own, not just a room off my kitchen. Understanding dawned. You'd let me live here, it's still my property, he said quickly. But you'd have privacy, independence. You've been through enough without having to answer to another man so soon. The thoughtfulness of the gesture caught Eleanor by surprise. In the weeks she'd known Vincent Xavier, she'd seen his fairness, his quiet competence, his occasional dry humor. But this level of consideration, understanding what a widow might need beyond mere shelter, touched something deep within her. Thank you, she said simply. I would like that very much. Summer settled over Wyoming territory, bringing long days of sunshine and work. Eleanor moved into the cabin, which she and Vincent spent a week repairing together. She continued her duties at the main house, cooking and cleaning, but retreated each evening to her own space, a luxury she hadn't expected to find again so soon. As the weeks passed, Eleanor noticed subtle changes in her relationship with Vincent. Their conversations over evening meals lengthened, ranging from practical ranch matters to deeper subjects, books they'd read, places they'd seen, dreams deferred by circumstance. Vincent, she discovered, was well educated despite his frontier lifestyle. He quoted Shakespeare on occasion and had strong opinions about politics. He treated her not as a servant or a charity case, but as an equal whose thoughts were worth hearing. For her part, Eleanor found herself watching him when he worked with the horses, the gentle authority in his hands, the way even the most spirited animals calmed under his touch. She admired his fairness with Frank, his honesty in business dealings, the respect he commanded without demanding it. These feelings confused her. Thomas had been gone barely 3 months. Her grief was still raw, her future uncertain. Yet she couldn't deny the warmth that spread through her whenever Vincent appeared at her cabin door, often bearing some small gift, wildflowers, a book from town, a jar of honey from a neighbor's hives. July 4th brought a celebration in Green River. Vincent asked Eleanor to accompany him, his invitation carefully worded to avoid any implication of impropriety. The whole town will be there, he explained. Good opportunity for you to meet people, make connections. Eleanor agreed, wearing one of the new dresses she'd made from the fabric Vincent had purchased. The dark green calico was simple but becoming, and she'd taken extra care with her hair, pinning it in a style she hadn't attempted since Thomas's death. When Vincent saw her emerge from the cabin, he removed his hat, a gesture of respect that somehow felt more personal than usual. "Mrs. Davis," he said, his voice catching slightly, "you look mighty fine today." Eleanor felt herself blush like a girl rather than a widow of 30. "Thank you, Mr. Xavier. Shall we go?" The town celebration was in full swing when they arrived, tables laden with food, musicians playing, children running with sparklers despite the daylight. Eleanor tensed when they first entered the crowd, scanning for Mercer's scarred face, but Vincent's hand at her elbow was reassuring. "No sign of him," Vincent murmured. "Word is he's been in Cheyenne for weeks." The news allowed Eleanor to relax and enjoy the festivities. Vincent introduced her to neighbors and friends, decent folk, who welcomed her without prying into her circumstances. By mid-afternoon, she found herself laughing at the antics of a pie-eating contest, momentarily free from the shadow of recent tragedies. "It's good to hear you laugh," Vincent said quietly as they watched the contest's aftermath, children with berry-stained faces being scrubbed by exasperated mothers. "Been wondering if you ever would again." Eleanor glanced at him, surprised by the admission. "I wasn't sure I could," she confessed. "After everything," Vincent nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Grief has its own timetable, but life has a way of continuing whether we're ready or not." As dusk fell, lanterns were lit and the dancing began. Eleanor hadn't danced since before Thomas's final illness, and she watched with a mixture of longing and trepidation as couples took to the open area before the bandstand. "Would you care to dance, Mrs. Davis?" Vincent's voice startled her from her thoughts. He stood before her, hat in hand, uncertainty visible beneath his usual composure. Eleanor hesitated. Dancing with another man felt like a step she wasn't sure she was ready to take. Vincent seemed to read her thoughts. "Just as friends," he said softly. "Nothing more." The simple understanding in his words decided her. Eleanor placed her hand in his and allowed him to lead her to the dance floor. Vincent proved to be a surprisingly graceful dancer for a man who spent most of his days on horseback. He held her respectfully, maintaining a proper distance as they moved to the music. Yet Eleanor couldn't help noticing the strength in his hands, the clean scent of soap and leather that surrounded him, the way his eyes never left her face. As the music ended, a commotion near the edge of the gathering drew their attention. Raised voices cut through the festive atmosphere, followed by the unmistakable sound of a punch landing. "Stay here," Vincent instructed, moving toward the disturbance. Eleanor ignored the directive, following close behind. A small crowd had gathered around two men, Frank, Vincent's hired hand, and a stranger whose fancy vest marked him as an outsider. "What's happening?" Vincent demanded, pushing through to Frank's side. "This feller was asking questions about Mrs. Eleanor," Frank explained, his gentle face flushed with anger. "Said he works for Mercer, said nasty things." The stranger wiped blood from his split lip, eyeing Vincent with calculation. Just having a friendly conversation before this ox took offense. "Mr. Mercer's interested in the widow's situation, is all. Mrs. Davis's situation is none of Mercer's concern," Vincent replied coldly. "She's under my protection now," the man smirked. "That what they're calling it, protection?" His eyes slid to Eleanor. "Mighty convenient arrangement you found, madam. Husband barely cold before you," he never finished the sentence. Vincent's fist connected with his jaw, sending him sprawling into the dust. "Get out of Green River," Vincent said, his voice deadly quiet as the man struggled to his feet. "Tell Mercer that if he or any of his men come near Mrs. Davis again, they'll answer to me." Sheriff Tillman appeared, assessing the situation with experienced eyes. "Problem here, Xavier?" "No problem," Vincent answered, not taking his eyes off Mercer's man. "This gentleman was just leaving." The crowd parted as the stranger backed away, spitting blood. "This ain't over," he promised. "Mercer doesn't forget." When he was gone, Vincent turned to Eleanor, concern replacing anger. "I'm sorry about that. Should have known Mercer would have eyes in town." Eleanor was shaken but determined not to show it. "It's not your fault. I won't let him ruin today." But the incident cast a shadow over the remainder of the celebration. They left early, riding back to the ranch in silence broken only by the creaking of the wagon and the distant boom of fireworks behind them. At the cabin, Vincent helped Eleanor down, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "I meant what I said," he told her, his face partially hidden in the darkness. "You're under my protection. Mercer won't harm you again." Eleanor looked up at him, feeling the weight of his promise. "Why are you doing all this for me, Vincent, truthfully?" He was quiet so long she thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "Because I know what it is to lose everything, to have to start again with nothing but your own determination." "The war," she guessed. Vincent nodded. "My family's plantation in Virginia, all gone. I was 17 when I headed west with nothing but my father's horse-training knowledge and a stubborn refusal to be beaten." Eleanor reached out impulsively, touching his arm. "Thank you for telling me." His hand covered hers briefly. "Get some rest, Eleanor. I'll see you in the morning." As he walked away toward the main house, Eleanor found herself watching him longer than propriety allowed, wondering at the complicated man who had become her protector, her employer, and perhaps her friend. August brought scorching heat to Wyoming territory. The land baked under relentless sun, streams shrank to trickles, and tempers frayed in the oppressive warmth. Eleanor rose before dawn each day to complete her heaviest work before the worst heat settled in. One such morning, she arrived at the main house to find Vincent already gone, a note explaining he'd ridden to a neighboring ranch to help with a difficult foaling. Eleanor set about her tasks, grateful for the relative coolness of the early hour. She was hanging laundry when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Expecting Vincent, she turned with a smile that died on her lips when she saw Sela's Mercer dismounting instead, alone but no less menacing for it. "Mrs. Davis," he greeted her, removing his hat with mocking civility. "Working hard, I see, quite a change from being a landowner." Eleanor glanced toward the bunkhouse, but Frank had ridden out with Vincent. She was alone. "What do you want, Mr. Mercer?" she asked, proud of how steady her voice remained despite her racing heart. "Just a conversation." He approached slowly like a predator confident in its power. "I've been thinking about your situation. Perhaps we got off on the wrong foot." Eleanor stood her ground. "You burned my home. There's no wrong foot about that." Mercer waved a dismissive hand. "A regrettable misunderstanding." "Hot heads among my associates." His scarred face arranged itself into what might have been intended as a sympathetic expression. "I've come to offer restitution." "Restitution?" Eleanor echoed skeptically. "I'm prepared to pay you for the property," Mercer continued. "Fair market value. Enough for you to start fresh somewhere more, suitable for a lady of your refinement." Eleanor knew a trap when she saw one. "If the land is rightfully mine, as I maintain, why would you need to buy it?" Mercer's false civility slipped. "Because it stands in the way of my plans for the territory." "That water access is vital." He stepped closer. "Be reasonable, Mrs. Davis. You're alone in the world now. Xavier's protection is temporary at best. Men like him don't settle with widows when they can have their pick of young girls." The crude assessment stung, not least because Eleanor had harbored similar doubts herself, but she refused to let Mercer see her uncertainty. "I'll consider your offer," she said, buying time. "I'll need to discuss it with my lawyer." Mercer laughed. "What lawyer? We both know you're bluffing." His hand shot out, gripping her arm painfully. "I'm not a patient man, Mrs. Davis. Sign the deed transfer now, take the money, and disappear, or things will get unpleasant. Let her go." Vincent's voice cut through the tension like a whip crack. He stood 20 yards away, rifle aimed steadily at Mercer's chest. Frank loomed behind him, shotgun at the ready. Mercer released Eleanor's arm but didn't step back. "Xavier, always interrupting private conversations." "There's nothing private about threatening a woman on my property," Vincent replied, advancing slowly. "Step away from her, now." Mercer assessed the situation, clearly calculating his odds. Finally, he backed away, hands raised in mock surrender. "No threats, just business, Mrs. Davis and I were discussing a settlement for her land claim. Any business with Mrs. Davis goes through me," Vincent said, his rifle unwavering. "And we both know her claim is legitimate." A sly smile spread across Mercer's face. "Do we?" "Interesting how invested you've become in the widow's affairs. Town's talking, Xavier. Wonder what they'd say if they knew you'd taken up with a woman whose husband's been dead less than 6 months." Eleanor felt her face flush with anger and shame. "That's a lie, is it?" Mercer's eyes moved between them knowingly. "Maybe not yet, but we all see how this story ends." Vincent's expression didn't change, but something dangerous flashed in his eyes. "Get off my land, Mercer. Don't come back. Or what, you'll shoot an unarmed businessman in cold blood." Mercer retrieved his hat, dusting it off casually. "That would solve my problems nicely. You'd hang, and the widow would be alone again, ripe for persuasion." Vincent said nothing, but the rifle remained steady. Mercer mounted his horse with deliberate slowness. "Think about my offer, Mrs. Davis. It's the only one you'll get." With a tip of his hat, he rode away, unhurried. When he was out of sight, Vincent lowered the rifle, turning to Eleanor with concern. "Are you hurt?" "No." Her voice trembled despite her efforts to control it. "But he's right about one thing, the town is talking." Vincent's jaw tightened. "Let them talk." "It's my reputation at stake," Eleanor pressed. "And yours. Perhaps I shouldn't stay here. I could find work in town and go where Mercer can get to you more easily," Vincent interrupted. "That's exactly what he wants." Frank, who had remained silent until now, spoke up. "Mr. Vince is right, Miss Eleanor. Mercer's dangerous. Better to have folks talking than to be alone." Eleanor knew they were right, yet the situation had become more complicated than she'd anticipated. She had come to Vincent's ranch expecting only temporary shelter. She hadn't expected to find a man whose quiet strength called to something within her, or to discover that her presence might damage his standing in the community. "I should at least return to town with Frank sometimes," she conceded. "Show my face in church. Let people see I'm working honestly. It might quiet the gossip." Vincent nodded, though reluctance was clear in his expression. "If you think it best, but never alone, not while Mercer's making threats." As August gave way to September, Eleanor established a new routine that included Sunday services in Green River. The initial curiosity about her presence at Vincent Xavier's ranch gradually faded as she became a familiar figure, dignified in her widow's garb and unfailingly polite. She made a point of speaking with the minister's wife, accepting invitations to ladies' sewing circles, establishing herself as a respectable woman working for her keep. If people still whispered about her relationship with Vincent, at least they did so with less certainty and malice. Vincent, for his part, maintained a careful distance in public while becoming an increasingly important presence in her private life. He visited her cabin most evenings, often bringing small gifts or books they might discuss. They talked for hours on her small porch, watching stars emerge in the vast Wyoming sky, sharing thoughts they'd never voiced to others. Eleanor learned that Vincent had been engaged once, years earlier, to a banker's daughter in Laramie. She had broken it off when a wealthier suitor appeared. "Probably for the best," he admitted as they sat watching a meteor shower in mid-September. "I wasn't ready then to be the man a wife deserves." "And now?" Eleanor asked, the question slipping out before she could reconsider. Vincent was quiet for a long moment. "Now I know what matters," he said finally. "Honesty, loyalty, courage, the rest is just trimmings." The simple statement resonated with Eleanor's own evolving understanding of life's priorities. Thomas had been a good husband, kind, hardworking, devoted, but their marriage had been built on youthful expectations and Eastern conventions that meant little in the harsh reality of frontier life. With Vincent, she found herself appreciating different qualities: his fundamental decency, his willingness to stand against injustice, the respect with which he treated everyone from the town drunk to the territorial governor who occasionally bought his horses. These thoughts troubled her, not because they diminished Thomas's memory, but because they suggested a future she hadn't allowed herself to contemplate. A future that might include feelings she wasn't sure she had the right to harbor. The situation with Mercer remained unresolved. Sheriff Tillman reported that the man had been in and out of the territory, apparently focused on other business ventures for the moment. But Vincent remained wary, insisting on precautions that sometimes frustrated Eleanor. "I can't live in fear forever," she protested one evening after he objected to her plan to visit a friend's farm alone. "Mercer could lurk in the shadows for years. Am I to have no independence until then?" Vincent ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration she'd come to know well. "It's not about independence, Eleanor, it's about safety." "Is it?" she challenged. "Or is it about control? Because I've had my fill of men making decisions for me, Vincent, no matter how well-intentioned." His expression shifted, hurt replacing frustration. "I would never presume to control you." "I only want to protect me, I know." Eleanor softened, regretting her sharpness. "And I'm grateful, but protection becomes a cage if it limits my choices." Vincent nodded slowly, understanding dawning. "You're right. I've been so focused on keeping you safe that I forgot you need to live, not just survive." He offered a rueful smile. "Stubborn woman." "Overprotective man," she countered, relief lightening her mood. They stood facing each other in the gathering twilight, the familiar comfort between them suddenly charged with something less easily defined. Vincent took a half-step closer, then stopped himself. "Eleanor," he began, his voice unusually hesitant, "I want to ask you something, but I fear it's too soon." Her heart quickened. "Ask anyway." Before he could continue, the sound of approaching riders interrupted the moment. Vincent tensed, moving instinctively in front of Eleanor as three mounted figures emerged from the tree line. Sheriff Tillman led the group, his expression grim. "Xavier," he called, "we need to talk." Vincent and Eleanor exchanged glances before moving to meet the riders. Besides the sheriff, there was his deputy and a man Eleanor didn't recognize, middle-aged, well-dressed, with the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. "This is Judge Wilson from Cheyenne," Tillman explained after dismounting. "He's investigating corruption charges against Judge Baldwin and Silas Mercer." Hope flared in Eleanor's chest. "Corruption charges?" Judge Wilson nodded gravely. "Several landowners have come forward with similar stories to yours, Mrs. Davis. Forged loan documents, intimidation, property seizures. We believe Mercer and Baldwin have been working this scheme across 3 counties." "Can you prove it?" Vincent asked, skepticism evident. "We're building a case," Wilson replied. "Mrs. Davis's testimony could be crucial. She's one of the few who can directly connect Mercer to the burning of property." Sheriff Tillman cleared his throat uncomfortably. "There's more. Mercer's been arrested in Cheyenne, but he's claiming the whole operation was your idea, Xavier. Says you've been trying to eliminate competition for water rights by forcing out small landowners." Vincent's expression hardened. "That's absurd." "We know," the sheriff assured him, "but Mercer's desperate. He's throwing accusations in every direction, hoping something sticks." Judge Wilson studied Vincent thoughtfully. "Your reputation speaks for itself, Mr. Xavier, but we'll need Mrs. Davis to testify in Cheyenne next week. Her account could be the key to putting both men behind bars." Eleanor straightened her shoulders. "I'll testify. I want justice for what they did." Vincent placed a hand at the small of her back, a subtle gesture of support that didn't go unnoticed by the visitors. "We'll both go to Cheyenne," he said firmly. "Mercer's threatened her before. I won't have her traveling alone." Judge Wilson's eyes moved between them, assessing. "Very well, the territorial court convenes Monday morning." After the visitors departed, Eleanor and Vincent sat on her porch in silence, absorbing the unexpected development. Finally, Vincent spoke. "You don't have to do this. Testifying means facing Mercer again, having your life examined by strangers." Eleanor looked at him steadily. "You know I do, not just for myself, but for others who might suffer as I did." She hesitated. "What were you going to ask me?" Before they arrived, Vincent's gaze dropped to his hands. "It can wait. This isn't the right time." "Vincent," she said softly, "if I've learned anything these past months, it's that there's never a perfect time for anything that matters." He raised his eyes to meet hers. "I was going to ask if you might consider staying, not as my housekeeper, but permanently as my wife." The directness of the proposal caught Eleanor by surprise, though perhaps it shouldn't have. Vincent Xavier was not a man who navigated by indirection. "I know it's too soon," he continued quickly. You're still grieving Thomas, and we've known each other mere months. But I've never met a woman with your courage, your grace under fire. I find myself thinking of you constantly, wanting to build something lasting with you." Eleanor felt tears welling, not tears of grief or confusion, but of a startling clarity. "It is soon," she acknowledged. "By any conventional measure, but nothing about our circumstances has been conventional." Hope flickered in Vincent's eyes. "Is that a maybe?" "It's an I need time," she corrected gently. "Time to be certain my feelings aren't born of gratitude or fear. You deserve better than that, Vincent." "And so do I," he nodded, disappointment visible but acceptance stronger. "I understand, and I'll wait, Eleanor, however long you need." The journey to Cheyenne the following week was undertaken in a wagon with Frank accompanying them for additional security. The territorial capital was larger and more developed than Green River, with brick buildings and boardwalks lining the main streets. Judge Wilson had arranged accommodations for Eleanor at her respectable boarding house, while Vincent and Frank took rooms at a nearby hotel. The separation was proper but felt strange after months of living in such close proximity. The trial began Monday morning in the territorial courthouse. Eleanor, dressed in her best, testified clearly about the night her home burned, about Mercer's threats and the forged loan documents. Other witnesses followed, farmers and ranchers with similar stories. A bank clerk who admitted to falsifying records under Baldwin's direction, even one of Mercer's own men who turned state's evidence in exchange for leniency. Mercer himself sat stone-faced throughout, avoiding Eleanor's gaze. Judge Baldwin appeared shrunken in his disgrace, the judicial robes he'd abused now absent. On the trial's third day, the jury returned their verdict, guilty on all counts. Judge Wilson sentenced both men to 15 years in the territorial prison, along with financial restitution to their victims. "It won't bring back your home," Vincent said as they left the courthouse, "but at least they can't hurt anyone else." Eleanor nodded, a weight lifting from her shoulders. "And my land," Judge Wilson says the title will be cleared. "It's yours free and clear." The realization brought mixed emotions. The land was hers again, the place where Thomas was buried, where they had built their life together. Yet returning there alone held little appeal compared to the life she'd begun to build at Vincent's ranch. They departed Cheyenne the next morning, traveling at a leisurely pace through the autumn-touched landscape. The aspens had turned golden, and the air carried the crispness of approaching winter. Eleanor found herself watching Vincent as he drove the wagon, studying the strong profile that had become so dear to her. "I've been thinking about your proposal," she said as they made camp the second evening, Frank discreetly occupying himself at a distance. Vincent looked up from the fire he was building, surprise and hope visible in his expression. "Have you now?" Eleanor nodded, suddenly nervous despite her certainty. "I think, that is, I know, my feelings for you aren't born of circumstance, they're real, Vincent. Deeper than I thought possible after Thomas." Vincent set aside the kindling he was holding, moving to stand before her. "Eleanor Davis, are you accepting my proposal?" "I am," she said, a smile breaking through her nervousness, "if the offer still stands." His answer came in the form of a kiss, gentle at first, then deepening with months of restrained feeling. When they finally parted, both breathless, Vincent pressed his forehead to hers. "I never thought I'd find you," he whispered. "Not here in this wilderness, not after everything." Eleanor understood. They were both survivors who had lost what they'd once believed essential, only to discover new possibilities in the aftermath. Different possibilities, truer ones perhaps. "What about my land?" she asked, practical concerns intruding on the moment. "I can't simply abandon Thomas's grave," Vincent nodded thoughtfully. "We'll fence it properly, visit when you wish, maybe even build something there someday, not to live in, but to remember." The simple understanding in his words confirmed what Eleanor already knew, that this man, who had offered shelter when she had nothing, would continue to shelter her heart with the same quiet strength. They were married in Green River's small church 2 weeks later, with Frank beaming proudly as witness and the townspeople who had once gossiped now offering genuine congratulations. Eleanor wore a new dress of deep blue silk, Vincent's wedding gift, with her mother's locket containing Thomas's portrait. The past honored, but the future embraced. Their wedding night, in the main house that would now be truly their home, was a discovery of tenderness neither had expected to find again. Vincent's reverence for her body matched his respect for her spirit, and Eleanor found herself awakening to sensations she'd never experienced in her first marriage. "I love you," he murmured as they lay entwined in the darkness. "Have since that first morning I saw you in my kitchen, saving my breakfast from ruin." Eleanor laughed softly. "That early, I was still half broken then." "Not broken," he corrected, "bent perhaps, as we all are by life, but that only makes the straightening more beautiful to witness." Winter arrived with a vengeance that year, blanketing the ranch in snow that isolated them from town for weeks at a time. But the Xavier household was warm with newfound happiness. Eleanor and Vincent settled into marriage as if they'd been partners for years rather than months, their complementary strengths creating a harmony neither had known was possible. Spring brought renewal in more ways than one. As the land greened again, Eleanor discovered she was carrying their child, news that brought tears to Vincent's eyes when she told him. "A family," he said wonderingly, his hand gentle on her still flat abdomen. "Our family." They rode together to Thomas's grave that day, now properly fenced and marked with a stone Eleanor had commissioned. She stood beside it, Vincent's supportive arm around her waist, and felt a complex peace settle over her. "I think he would approve," she said quietly. "Thomas wanted me to be happy, to live fully. He told me so before he died." Vincent nodded, respectful of the moment and the man who had come before him. "Then we'll honor him by doing exactly that." Their son was born the following November, a strong, healthy boy they named William Thomas Xavier. Frank, appointed honorary uncle, carved him a wooden horse that became his first treasured possession. Over the years, the Xavier ranch prospered and expanded. Eleanor's business acumen complemented Vincent's horse training skills, allowing them to build one of the most successful breeding operations in the territory. They eventually built a proper house on Eleanor's original property, not to live in, as Vincent had predicted, but as a guest house for visiting horse buyers and a place to stay when tending Thomas's grave. 3 more children joined the family, 2 daughters, and another son, filling their home with laughter and activity. The cabin where Eleanor had found her first independence became, in time, a retreat where she and Vincent stole occasional days alone, remembering how their unlikely love had begun. Wyoming became a state, the frontier slowly tamed, but the spirit that had drawn them both west remained. On summer evenings, they still sat together on the porch, watching stars appear over land that had tested them and ultimately blessed them. "Did you ever imagine this?" Eleanor asked on their 20th anniversary, her hand still fitting perfectly in Vincent's despite the years that had weathered them both. "When you found me by that stream, half drowned and homeless," Vincent smiled, the same smile that still quickened her heart after all this time. "Not specifically this, but I knew somehow that you were my beginning as much as I was yours." Eleanor leaned her head against his shoulder, contentment spreading through her like the golden light of the setting sun. From tragedy had come renewal, from loss had come finding. The path had been neither straight nor easy, but it had led exactly where they were meant to be.